Happy 1 year in quarantine, guys. Our boring dystopia marches forward. People continue to struggle with crippling loneliness, the stress of either not having a job or having an essential job, the rising death toll, the uncertainty for the future, and having to pretend like everything is okay. 2020 in many ways was a year that was. Given how 2021 is going and the fact that time doesn't seem to exist anymore, I would argue we're still living in a year that was. When the Capitol was broken into specifically, I found myself caught between the impulse to laugh and to be very afraid. Maybe it was the last straw after the World War III scare, the quarantine, the police brutality, the wildfire doomscape, the election that would not end, and the constant atmosphere of despair. The list goes on. Sometimes we get memes out of awful current events, and sometimes they're funny, but as things continue to get worse, I have to ask, how do you laugh when everything is falling apart? And that isn't a rhetorical question because I would be outraged that people would dare cope with humor. I'm genuinely asking, how do you laugh when society is collapsing?
For if the bomb that drops on you gets your friends and neighbors too, there'll be nobody left behind to grieve, and we will all go together when we go.
This is Tom Lehrer. Harvard mathematician, musical genius, and all-around cool guy, Tom Lehrer rose to fame in the 1950s and 60s for his biting satirical songs about everything from the chemical elements to BDSM.
I ache for the touch of your lips, dear, but much more for the touch of your whips, dear.
I feel the need to mention that at this time, married couples on TV were still sleeping in separate beds. Lucy and Ricky, an actual married couple, being implied to have sex was just too much. His rise to fame is as fascinating as his sudden but deliberate departure, but what he managed to do in his few short years as a self-made star had a sizable impact, creating a sound that defined an anti-nuclear, pro-civil rights left, and inspiring the likes of Weird Al Yankovic. Through music, Lehrer confronted the society he knew, a society that was racked with racial tension, the aftermath of a president's assassination, a military conflict going nowhere, and the threat of nuclear annihilation. Heck, he was memeing about World War III years before we ever did. And he did it all, with a jaunty tune and a wicked smile.
Just sing out a Te Deum when you see that ICBM, and the party will be come as you are.
It's no secret that the 1960s were a tumultuous time, and that gave Tom Lehrer some great material to work with. Most of these songs specifically were written during his tenure on a show called That Was the Week That Was. Think Saturday Night Live, but if it were just Weekend Update. So every week he would sing a song, usually censored by the studio for being too spicy, and eventually, he compiled all of those songs together, as intended, into an album called That Was the Year That Was. And it was through listening to this album that I learned to laugh while society is collapsing. Again. One note before we begin, because I only picked a handful of songs to focus on, and they are written in that order on my notes. I say things like second song on the album or last song on the album. It's not entirely accurate. There's still a handful of songs that I don't discuss. So if you want to hear the full album, go and listen to it. I do recommend it. But I just want to clarify that the order I talk about these songs is not the order they appear on the album. All right, cool, let's go. The first track on this album is National Brotherhood Week, which was an initiative for about 40 years that I'll let Tom explain how it works.
I'd like to start out with telling you something about a very peculiar American custom. 1 week in every February is officially designated as National Brotherhood Week. This means that we're supposed to stop whatever we're doing, burning, killing, whatever, and love everybody else. And it's really quite a strain. Here's a song about National Brotherhood Week.
Performative activism ended up being a theme for the summer of 2020, where it was more important to look like you cared than to actually do anything.
But during National Brotherhood Week, National Brotherhood Week, New Yorkers love the Puerto Ricans 'cause it's very chic.
The song skewers the disingenuous nature of any equality or kindness campaign that has nothing behind it. Especially the line about how it's only for a week. You know, just how like on March 1st we forget about Black history, or on July 1st there's no more gay pride. It honestly reminds me of the calls for unity after the new administration was sworn in and how every American scoffed audibly at the suggestion.
In these difficult times, as we sit helplessly by and watch the world slip slowly down around our ankles, it's comforting to realize that no matter how great the crisis, the United States always has its ultimate instrument of diplomacy to rely on, and that is the United States Marines. Here's a song about that.
The second song on the album is called Send the Marines, and this is one that I find myself singing constantly. While the Marines are the focus of Tom's song, I tend to have a lot of frustrations with the military-industrial complex in general. I tend to laugh at like those Facebook memes where it's just like stock images of the flag with Comic Sans text about how soldiers are dying for my freedoms, and I'm like, you're gonna have to do way better than that to convince me that any of the forever wars in the Middle East were about my freedom. Like, why are my tax dollars being used to drone strike civilians in Syria?
Members of the Corps all hate the thought of war. They'd rather kill them off by peaceful means.
Why are we using this myth of freedom to justify our armed forces being a tool of aggression?
Stop calling it aggression. Ooh, we hate that expression. We only want the world to know that we support the status quo. They love us everywhere we go. So when in doubt, send the Marines.
The song after that is a little ditty called Pollution.
If you visit American City, you will find it very pretty. Just two things of which you must beware. Don't drink the water and don't breathe the air.
Nothing has changed since 1965 in that regard. In fact, I would argue things have gotten much worse. Man-made materials outweigh all life on Earth. Oil spills, rainforest devastation. California's air is just smoke sometimes. Flint still doesn't have clean water. But I'm sure the Earth will be fine, just fine.
Wear a gas mask and a veil. Then you can breathe, long as you don't inhale.
Speaking of gas masks, remember the time we almost went to war with Iran? Like, actual nuclear war? All this time, we thought it would be Russia we would go to war with. So Long Mom, a song for World War III, is exactly that, a song for World War III.
As you know, World War III will be the first World War to be seen on television, and I certainly hope that we all have color television by then.
We do have color TV now, and we have 24-hour news cycles, so we get to experience our military endeavors in full HD every minute of the day. But what I appreciate most about this song is Tom's biting indictment of people looking back on war almost fondly because we got good music out of it. Let's not fetishize war to shame generations for not having to go. Not going to war should be the goal. But then again, war may be rendered obsolete in case someone decides to slap that little nuclear button. The song after that, very fitting, is Who's Next? Nuclear proliferation was a hot button issue in the 60s, and our fear of who has a nuclear bomb and who doesn't, that fear hasn't really gone away.
First we got the bomb, and that was good, 'cause we love peace and motherhood. Then Russia got the bomb, but that's okay, 'cause the balance of power's maintained that way. Who's next?
We're still monitoring Russia, North Korea, and Jeff to see what they're going to do with those nuclear arms. So the fear has escalated from who's going to get one to who's going to use it first. Great. Even better.
We'll try to stay serene and calm when Alabama gets the bomb. Who's next? Who's next? Who's next? Who's next?
The last song on the album is Werner von Braun, a song about the divorce of science from ethics and how weird it was to have former Nazi working in American labs.
Nazi schmatzi, says Werner von Braun.
Maybe tech giants like Musk and Gates aren't Nays. The idea of ethical consumption is much more of an issue now than it was then. Like, maybe we're not having products made by Nays, but we do have the situation of, I just want to make chocolate milk, but Nestle's committed crimes against humanity. Whistling this song in a Kroger doesn't free us from the reality that a lot of the companies we regularly purchase from do some pretty horrific things. But we are able to commiserate over the fact that we are complicit when we overlook those atrocities in the name of convenience. But it doesn't really help when there are only 6 companies to choose from. It isn't comforting exactly, but maybe it's reassuring that these have always been problems. And at the same time, calling it reassuring isn't totally accurate either, because it means these things have continued to be problems, have never been solved, and probably won't ever be solved, and that can be really scary. But the thing that the year that was did for me was show me that I'm not alone in these fears. It isn't that there's nothing we can do, it's just we can't do everything. It is worth mentioning that Tom didn't really think his music had the power to change anything. He wondered if his music was popular because the audience could always shove the problems off onto a proverbial them. I wasn't necessarily expecting the music to change my circumstances, but it did offer a more productive way to spend my time than doom scrolling. It was comforting to just turn on the music and laugh for a bit. At the very least, it did a measure of good in helping me untangle this new normal. And maybe he can help you too. All of his music is in the public domain, at least until 2024, because he has no use for the revenue anymore, and he said, why keep it from people? It's also his birthday, so what better way to celebrate his birthday than to download and listen to his entire discography? Happy birthday, Tom. Thank you for helping me untangle this year that was.
Inspiring achievement. Yes, we all will go together when we go. We will all go together when we go. All suffused with an incandescent glow. No one will have the endurance to collect on his insurance. Lloyds of London will be loaded when they go. We will all fry together when we fry. We'll be French fried potatoes by and by. There will be no more misery when the world is our rotisserie. Yes, we all will fry together when we fry. We will all bake together when we bake. There'll be nobody present at the wake. With complete participation in that grand incineration, nearly 3 billion hunks of well-done steak.